Hi folks, in this video we are talking about population pyramids, and after you watch this you should be able to analyze population composition and explain the causes and implications of an aging population. So we're going to kind of break this lecture down into all of these different categories. So take a second to set up your notes and make sure that your key topics here are highlighted. Okay, so what is a population pyramid? A population pyramid is a bar graph, okay? And so you can see here, this is the typical population pyramid, and it represents the distribution of population of a country by age and sex, okay? And so you can see here, the graph shows the percentage of population in 5-year age groups. So we've got the youngest age groups at the bottom and the oldest at the top. And then the lines, the length of the bar, it typically represents the percentage of total population of each of those age groups. So for instance, this one is a little funky because it just uses population as a total number, and you may see that sometimes too, but oftentimes down here, these are going to be percentages. So you want to always make sure you're reading a key anyway. So for instance, we can see here that the largest amount of population is women who are within 50 to 45, okay, here in America. And so it just shows us, you know, how old are people and how many people are of that age. And it's important to know that people use population pyramids to project population growth and decline, and then also to predict markets for goods and services. So population pyramids are automatically going to reveal the stage of the demographic transition model that a country is in. So if you take a look here, you can see that stage 1, remember there are no countries in stage 1 currently, but stage 2 is when we see that rapid expansion, right, of population growth. So most countries that are rapidly expanding are going to have this triangular shape. Stage 3 of the DTM is when we're going to see that late expansion. So it's still expanding but starting to decline. Stage number 4 is when we see stable population, and stage number 5 is when we go into that population decline itself. So this is kind of a general guideline for how you can align a population pyramid with the DTM. And there's a lot of things that we can infer from looking at a population pyramid. And so what we're really going to do is identify the stage of the DTM, or identify essential things on the population pyramid that hint to us some demographic information. So first of all, we're going to be able to tell the status of women in that country, as well as analyze the crude birth rate, total fertility rate, and natural increase rate. We'll be able to infer the population's access to education, healthcare, and social services, as well as the level of economic development of this particular country that we would be looking at. We'll be able to also generally infer if this country has a high or low agricultural density, and we can think about the stage of the epidemiological transition model. So how are people generally dying? And then lastly, we'll be able to infer what kind of population policies governments are making, either pro-natalist, encouraging births, or anti-natalist, discouraging births, to control their population. Okay, so when you're looking at a population pyramid, you have to consider the dependency ratio. And the dependency ratio is the number of people who are either too young or too old to work. And then that's compared to the people who are considered economically active, so in their productive years. So if you look here, dependents are either youth dependents. These are the percentage of population that is under 15 years old. Okay, so you can see the percent of the US population under 15 is 18.8%. We also have elderly dependents up here. This is the percentage of population over the age of 65. And so, again, if you look down here, let me move my mouse so you can see, the percentage of the US that's over 64 is 15.3%. Okay, so that means that our economically active group here in the United States, ages 15 to 64, is going to be 65.9% of our total population. And so keep in mind that the greater the dependency ratio, the greater the financial burden on those who are working to support those who are not, right? So we have to think about all of these economically active people are helping to support the youth and the elderly people in the society. And also, the greater the dependency ratio, the greater the burden of the government to provide certain types of public services or infrastructure. Okay, so for instance, if we have a really high elderly dependency ratio, there'll be certain infrastructures and things that the government will need to provide versus a youth. Those are very different. But before we move on into talking about that, let's talk about how to find it. This equation isn't super important for you, but I just want you to be familiar with it. So you can see I have all my data down here for the United States. And how you're going to calculate a dependency ratio is you are going to add the two dependents percentages. So this is the youth dependency, this is the elderly dependency, and you are going to divide it by the economically productive percentage, right? So the total dependency ratio in the US is 0.52, or you could look at it as 1 to every half, right? So we have one economically productive person for every half dependent person in the United States. So we do not have a very high dependency ratio. Okay, so if we have a high elderly dependency, right? So this is when we're seeing a lot more people at the top of the pyramid than we are at the bottom or the middles of the pyramid. And so again, you have financial burden on those who are working, but you also have burden on the government. So high elderly dependency is going to put a strain on things like retirement homes, hospitals, the Social Security system, and retirement systems, right? So our world elderly dependency ratio is about 9 to 1, meaning that there are 9 working people for every 1 elderly person. However, in 2050, that's estimated to change to 4 to 1, right? So only 4 working people to support each elderly dependency or elderly person. And so an elderly dependency ratio can also strain our labor markets, right? There might not be enough people or enough trained or educated people to fill the jobs that these elders are retiring from rapidly. And in addition to that, people need to contribute to pension systems and healthcare to help support the elderly when they grow old and cannot work as well. So these are the kind of infrastructures and systems that are going to be strained by having a high elderly dependency. Having a high youth dependency is kind of similar, but in different ways, right? So a high youth dependency is going to put a strain on schools, child care centers, pediatricians, right? Think about things that specifically kids access. And also, a youth dependency ratio is going to indicate that in the future, many more jobs will be needed to keep the people of that country employed, right? So this is what a population pyramid would look like with a high youth dependency ratio. You can see the bottom of the pyramid is very, very wide, whereas the top comes to a peak. And then you can also see here on this map that Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest youth dependency ratios in the world, but we also see pretty high youth dependency ratios here in South Asia as well as Southwest Asia. Okay, so I'm going to take a second to talk about demographic momentum. Think about it, right? What happens when you slam on the brakes of a moving vehicle? You do not stop right away. You skid forward, and that's because you have something called momentum due to your speed, right? And so the same thing kind of applies to population. So demographic momentum is the continued population increase as a result of a large segment of the population being young and still entering their reproductive years. So as a result, these countries are more likely to see monumental population growth for 50 years or more. And so another way to think about this is population momentum is the tendency of a population to continue to grow beyond the time when replacement levels of fertility are achieved. So remember, the replacement level for fertility rate is 2.1, right? So a country such as India may hit a 2.1 total fertility rate replacement, right? And that would indicate that their population would stop increasing rapidly. However, since they have so many people that are still in their reproductive years, right, they're still going to go through having children, it's not going to, that population growth isn't going to stop immediately, right? It has momentum, so it's built up and it's going to keep moving forward. Okay, so I just want to do a quick sample analysis of a population pyramid. We're going to work more on this in class together, but I want you to see kind of what we look at when we're looking at these population pyramids. So first of all, this is called a perfect pyramid, right? And it indicates, or a Christmas tree, and it indicates that a country is rapidly increasing. The population is rapidly increasing, so that means that it's going to have a high natural increase rate. A lot of people are having babies down here, which is why they're taking up so much percentage of the total population. We also can tell that crude birth rate and total fertility rate are high, right? Because, again, there's so many babies down here at the bottom. We can tell that life expectancy is short, right? Most people are not living past their middle-aged years in this country. And when we think about the dependency ratio, we've got a high youth dependency. So remember, that's a strain on things like childcare, schools, pediatricians. Okay, so there are some other features that we're able to tell by looking at this. So since we know that life expectancy is short and then crude birth rate is very high, we can kind of apply that this is a stage 2 of the demographic transition model, right? So in stage 2, I know that the status of women is not very high, right? So women are not active in the labor force, or in the country may value large families. The country's culture may value large families, but it's also going to indicate a very low literacy rate for women. In addition to that, the education and access to contraceptives is going to be low, so we don't see a lot of reproductive health education. We don't see wide access to contraceptives. And I can also tell that if we go down here to labor and workforce, that since the natural increase rate is so high, people are having so many babies, that there is a heavy reliance on families to work, right? So I can infer here that this is an agriculturally based society. And so since they need so many people to work, that means that their agricultural density is going to be very high. There's going to be a lot of people working in agriculture. Let's see, what else can I decide from looking at this? I can see that there's going to be a built-in labor force here for the future. So they're not going to face any labor shortages, but they may actually face rapid unemployment if the country's economy is not well developed. And then I can also tell that this population is going to continue to increase because of this built-in demographic momentum that I just talked to you about. It's a low elderly dependency, and it's probably at stage 2 of the epidemiological transition model, right? So people are mainly dying of infectious diseases like cholera or TB. So all in all, I can infer a lot of things about the country itself, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, by looking at a population pyramid like this. And you'll continue to practice that in class.